I walked through the gate of my son James's long-awaited new home, feeling proud. As I stepped out of the car, I was greeted by the sight of a spacious yard typical of American suburbs. A well-maintained lawn, vibrant flowers, and a newly built house with a modern, simple design. I caught my breath and whispered to myself, "He's grown up so well." This house was the result of years of saving by James and his wife Sarah. James, now 38, works as an engineer at a local IT company. He's grown into a serious, honest man who values his family. Sarah, 36, is an elementary school teacher. She's been working part-time since Emma was born, but her passion for education hasn't waned. It's always impressive to see her surrounded by children, treating them with love and care. Their daughter Emma, my granddaughter, is 6 years old. Active, cheerful, and always curious, Emma is my treasure. She seems like an ordinary girl, but I'm often surprised by her sharp intuition. Sometimes it causes worry, but today I was determined to forget such concerns and enjoy our time together. The front door opened, and Emma came running out to greet me energetically. "Grandma," she called out, her small hands gripping mine tightly. The warmth of her touch warmed my heart. "Emma, you've grown so much. How do you like your new house?" I asked with a smile. Emma grinned and said, "It's so big." But she hesitated for a moment, then quickly added, "I'll show you my room," as she pulled me into the house. The interior was spacious, with modern furniture and harmonious color schemes. The living room had large windows letting in natural light, creating a comfortable space. The kitchen was equipped with the latest appliances, beautifully arranged to reflect Sarah's taste. James was chatting with other relatives near the entrance. When he saw me, he smiled and approached, saying, "Mom, thank you for coming." Seeing his calm expression, I felt pride in my chest. Sarah, busy in the kitchen, noticed me and greeted me warmly, "Welcome, Margaret." Her smile was still full of kindness, conveying her dedication to her family. This housewarming party gathered not only family but also James and Sarah's close friends and colleagues. As barbecue preparations were underway, children ran around in the garden. House tours are typical at American housewarming parties, and guests were discussing the house design and furniture as they went from room to room. I occasionally heard comments like, "What a modern and beautiful house," and "I want a kitchen like this." I felt proud of my son and daughter-in-law's success. I was grateful to be gathered here to celebrate this day, watching over their happy family. As the lively housewarming party progressed, I suddenly noticed that my granddaughter Emma's behavior was a bit different than usual. She had been laughing innocently just moments ago, but now she was quiet, staring intently at the second floor from the corner of the living room. For a 6-year-old, her expression was unusually serious and somewhat fearful. A twinge of unease rippled through my chest. Emma had always been a bit different, especially sensitive for a child. From a young age, she had been attuned to subtle changes that other children wouldn't notice. She often sensed minute shifts in family or friends before anyone else, and sometimes she would be afraid of something in the house. I was a bit worried about Emma, but in the busyness of the party, I tried to push away that anxiety. "Grandma, is Emma okay?" James asked. He must have noticed that Emma had become a bit quiet. I forced a smile and shrugged lightly. Children sometimes get tired suddenly. No need to worry. But I felt like I was trying to convince myself. Emma looked up at me with an expression that suggested she wanted to say something. However, her small mouth remained tightly closed, no words coming out. Emma seemed to have been feeling uneasy about the new house since they first moved in. At first, everyone in the family dismissed it as stress from moving, but it seemed to be more than that. When I visited once before, Emma had tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Grandma, this house is a bit strange." At the time, I brushed off her words and laughed it off. But now I was beginning to think that maybe she had really sensed something then. Amidst the noise of the party, I occasionally followed Emma with my eyes. She was playing with her friends and cousins, but every so often she would stop and stare towards the second floor. Her gaze was as if she was searching for something, and it made my chest feel heavy. "What's wrong, Emma?" I asked, but she just shook her head without saying anything. Her gesture made me feel a bit irritated, but at the same time, I was afraid of hurting her sensitive heart. I pulled her close and stroked her head, whispering, "It's okay." But even then, her eyes were turned back towards the second floor, as if she didn't believe my words. The party continued. In the garden, the barbecue was being grilled, and laughter echoed. Adults were discussing the house design with wine in hand, and children were playing tag. James and Sarah seemed to be relaxing for the first time in a while, and I smiled at their happy appearance. In the midst of this, Emma came back to me. Her expression was dark, and her eyes looked somewhat frightened. "Grandma, I don't want to go upstairs," she said in a small voice. Her words resonated strongly in my heart. It was rare for her to speak so seriously. I looked at her intently, feeling the weight of her words. However, the adults around us were busy, and no one else noticed Emma's anxiety. "What's up there?" I asked gently. Emma hesitated a bit, then gripped my hand tightly with her small one. "There's something there." Her whisper rang in my ear like a small bell. At that moment, a chill ran through my chest. But I deliberately swallowed that fear and smiled calmly to reassure Emma. "I'm sure it's nothing. It's a day for celebration, let's enjoy it." Even as I said this, my heart was unsettled. I could feel Emma's anxiety slowly spreading within me. After that, Emma started playing with the other children again, seeming a bit calmer. However, for a while, my gaze remained fixed on the second floor. I couldn't shake off the inexplicable feeling that some invisible presence was lurking in the house, even as I tried to maintain composure amidst the party's clamor. As the party was nearing its end and the house was gradually becoming quieter, I noticed that my granddaughter Emma was still afraid of something. She kept glancing at the second floor, furrowing her brow. The sight made my heart flutter with unease. Emma had been feeling that something was there all along. Her intuition had surprised us many times before. I steeled my resolve to reassure her and to dispel my own anxieties. "Emma, shall we go take a look now?" I whispered in her ear. Emma nodded slightly and gripped my hand tightly. We headed to the second floor and walked down the hallway. The house was quiet and had grown a bit dark. As we approached the access door to the attic at the end of the hallway, we saw that it was locked. I hesitated for a moment. I hadn't expected it to be locked. "Grandma, what should we do?" Emma said in a small voice. She was holding my hand tightly, looking up at me with anxious eyes. "We need to find the key," I answered, looking around for it. This was a new house, but I wasn't sure why there would be a reason to lock the attic. The need for a key made me more anxious, but I smiled at Emma and said, "Let's look together," trying to reassure her. We split up and started searching places where the key might be. We checked the study on the second floor, storage spaces, and bedroom drawers, but couldn't find it. As our frustration grew, Emma whispered, "Maybe it's in Dad's room." We headed to James's bedroom and opened the side table drawer. There, we found a small key. "This must be it," I murmured, picking up the key. Emma looked at my hand and seemed to relax a bit. I returned to the hallway and took a deep breath in front of the attic door. "I'm going to open it," I said quietly, inserting the key into the lock. The sound of the key turning echoed in the silence, and the door slowly opened. A cool breeze flowed from the attic, and my heart was wrapped in even more tension. Emma was watching intently. The attic was dimly lit, dust swirled in the air, and the atmosphere felt heavy. I carefully stepped inside. Groping for the light switch, an old lamp cast a weak light. The attic was cluttered with old furniture and boxes, and a deafening silence prevailed. Then, something caught my eye. Something was lying in the darkness far away. As I cautiously approached, it became clear that it wasn't just luggage. What was lying there was my grandson Lucas. Lucas! I almost cried out, but the shock left me voiceless. He was curled up, his face covered in wounds, a painful sight. His clothes were dirty, his hair disheveled, as if he had been locked up here for a long time. For a moment, I couldn't accept the reality and stood there frozen. "Grandma, it's Lucas," Emma's small voice came from behind me. She was right behind me, staring intently at the scene. I immediately knelt down and reached out to Lucas's face. His skin was cold, and his breathing was shallow and weak. It was obvious at a glance that he was debilitated. My mind was in chaos, wondering why he was here and how this had happened. "Lucas, are you okay?" "It's Grandma," I spoke to him in a trembling voice, but he showed almost no response. His body was shaking, his eyes half open, and he seemed to be in a daze. Seeing him covered in wounds, I keenly felt that Emma's anxiety had been such a stark reality. "Emma, go call your father right away. Hurry," I instructed Emma in a shaky voice. Emma hesitated for a moment but then nodded and rushed down the stairs. I gently stroked Lucas's head, staying close to him. I didn't understand what had happened in this attic or why he was here, but I felt that help needed to be called immediately. The time it took for Emma to return with James felt like an eternity. I remained kneeling, watching over my grandson Lucas. His breathing was shallow, and he occasionally mumbled something in a weak voice. I spoke to him gently, trying to give him a sense of security, but his eyes still seemed to hold fear. Eventually, James came running up. His face was filled with surprise and confusion, but he seemed at a loss for words at the scene I had discovered in the attic. "Lucas, why is he here?" James asked in a shocked, trembling voice. I turned to him, feeling anger rising in my chest. However, I told myself that saving Lucas was the priority now, rather than blaming him. "We need to help him, we must take him to the hospital right now," I said in a strong tone. At that moment, Lucas spoke in a faint voice. "Grandma. Mom and Dad, they..." That one sentence froze my heart. His eyes were filled with fear, and it took me a moment to understand the meaning of his words. But in the next instant, everything connected. The reason he had been reported missing was actually because his parents, James and Sarah, had been keeping him locked in the attic. What does this mean? I turned to James, questioning him with my eyes. He opened his mouth but couldn't say anything. Instead, a momentary look of regret and guilt flashed across his face. We didn't know what to do." James finally managed to say. "What happened?" I asked calmly, but inside, anger and confusion were swirling. James began to speak in a heavy tone. "Lucas, he's been having problems for a long time. He couldn't control his emotions, and he was becoming increasingly violent at school. Even with counseling, he didn't improve, and we couldn't handle him at home. Sarah was exhausted too. In the end, we thought, hiding him in the house was the only option." As I listened to James's words, I trembled at their cruelty. No matter what problems there were, locking him up couldn't be the solution. I sent James a strong look and spoke quietly but sharply, choosing my words carefully. "I don't understand what you were thinking, but Lucas is your son. There's not a single reason that could justify doing this." James lowered his face and said nothing. I immediately picked up the phone and called the police. Considering the seriousness of the situation, I felt that not only did Lucas need to be saved, but the family's problems needed to be addressed from the root. While I was explaining the situation to the police, Lucas slightly opened his eyes and grabbed my hand. "Grandma. I'm sorry," he said weakly. "It's okay, Lucas. You've done nothing wrong." I gently squeezed his hand back, answering while holding back tears. Seeing Lucas's weakened state, I could painfully feel how much suffering and loneliness he must have endured. The police arrived, and the house was suddenly enveloped in tension. James and Sarah were questioned by the police, and Lucas was immediately taken to the hospital by ambulance. I stayed by Lucas's side, vowing that he would never go through something like this again. As the police investigation progressed, the family's problems came to light one after another. It became clear that James and Sarah had been struggling with their relationship with Lucas for a long time and had gradually become cornered. However, the method they chose could never be forgiven. I couldn't suppress my anger and disappointment towards James, my own son, but at the same time, I realized that they too had been suffering, and complex emotions spread in my chest. However, at that point, my greatest concern was to protect Lucas and Emma. I felt it was my mission to ensure they could return to a safe and secure place. With strong determination in my heart, I waited for the police investigation to end, resolved to do everything in my power to protect Emma and Lucas's future. With Lucas safely rescued and his parents under police investigation, I felt proud of my actions. Even though the family's dark secret had been exposed and we were facing difficult circumstances, I had managed to protect my grandchildren. Afterwards, James and Sarah were arrested and temporarily separated from their children. When the fact that Lucas had been confined in the attic came to light, Child Protective Services immediately intervened, and severe punishments were imposed on the parents. During the trial, it was discussed how James and Sarah had made an extreme choice as a way to deal with Lucas's behavioral problems. They deeply regretted their mistakes and repeatedly apologized sincerely to Lucas. James, in tears at the court, stated, "We couldn't handle him anymore and isolated him intending to protect him, but that ended up hurting him. We can't regret it enough." Sarah also tearfully apologized, saying, "As a mother, should have supported him more. What we did to him is absolutely unforgivable." The parents were placed under probation and required to participate in counseling and family relationship rebuilding programs. Under the supervision of Child Protective Services, they were allowed to reunite with Lucas and Emma, and preparations began for a new start as a family. It was several weeks later when they were able to return to daily life after the incident was resolved. Lucas had successfully received treatment at the hospital and was on the path to recovery, both physically and mentally. During his confinement, his life had been extremely harsh. Lucas was 9 years old, still small, and for a growing child like him, the confinement had caused great suffering. Lucas, hidden in the attic by his parents, was forced to live a very limited life. The meals given to him were meager, mostly canned goods and preserved foods, hardly balanced nutritionally. He couldn't exercise sufficiently, and his physical strength had drastically decreased. He wasn't allowed to take baths, and his hygienic condition had deteriorated. He was near his limit both physically and mentally, and the impact on his health was significant. The parents, as a solution to his behavioral problems, ultimately thought hiding him in the house was the answer. Lucas had difficulty controlling his emotions, and incidents of violence and impulsive behavior at school had increased. Even with counseling, his condition didn't improve. The parents gradually felt cornered and convinced themselves that isolating him at home was the safest option. But the damage it caused him was beyond imagination. Margaret stood by Lucas during his treatment while also focusing on caring for Emma. She was determined to build a new life with her family to protect her 2 grandchildren. James and Sarah are now undergoing psychological counseling together, aiming for the healing and regeneration of the entire family. Although their actions were inexcusable, Margaret decided to support them in standing up again as a family rather than completely cutting them off. One day, Margaret took Emma and Lucas to a nearby park. It was a typical suburban American park, filled with the sight of children playing energetically. Emma slid down the slide, while Lucas gently swung on the swing, a peaceful expression on his face. His face no longer showed the fear and terror of before, and Margaret felt that his heart was slowly but surely healing. "Grandma, today is fun," Emma said with a smile. Margaret squeezed her hand back and smiled softly. "Yes, and there will be many more fun times ahead." At that moment, Lucas also smiled faintly. He hadn't fully regained his energy yet, but there was definitely a light of hope shining in his heart. Margaret renewed her resolve to walk the long road ahead with them. Her strength and love had saved the family and opened the door to a new future. In this everyday moment, the time they spent together became a healing force for the family, and they began to walk